What's up, guys? This is Pete, aka Characters, and welcome back to another episode of the Carrot Poker Podcast. Today we are on to the second ever installment of the series entitled Hands from the Corner, where I'll be going through a few hand histories posted usually at Online 6 Max No Limit Cash by some of my aspiring players, my students that are part of the Carrot Corner private forum. This forum is now open to the public at a joining fee of £40 or roughly $60, or by taking one of my coaching packages, you're granted free access into a forum with lots of strong players, moderators, and then weaker players of all kind of experience levels who all sort of work together, solve quizzes set by me, post their own hands for discussion, and just have a lot of great poker discussion. Community is very important, and that's why I take great pride in the Carrot Corner private group. So we're going to dig into a few hands that have been posted, and we're going to start by one that's been posted by a newer member. So this situation is called Hand with a Lot of Action. So the student begins, we had no stats available when playing the hand. It's 888 snap tables, so it's the 888 equivalent of Zoom poker. I just added the stats so we could see stack sizes. Both villains are short, and probably it can be an indicator of a weaker player, question mark. Well, yeah, generally when you get players who are not 100 BBs deep, these are pretty much always going to be weaker players. Not always, but like 90-95% of the time. Kind of gone are the days of the short stacking reg. This is just something that's gone out of fashion. Presumably, the games have gotten tougher and the edge of being a short stacker is kind of decreased over the years, and a lot more edges are now coming in 100 big blind spots. People aren't playing as badly against short stackers as they used to. Poker knowledge is more abundant, and I guess it just goes with the trend. It's like anything, right? Like 1 year it's in, 1 year it's out. Kind of like limping from the small blind as a reg. That used to be really popular, then people realised it sucked. Anyway, so the student goes on to say that, well, let me describe the hand first because it'll make more sense after I've done so. So hero is in the small blind with ace king of hearts, and the cutoff calls 5 cents. This is 5NL. Button limps behind for 5 cents. These players are, well, they're both shorter stacked. They have like a 334 stack and a 338 stack, respectively, for button and cutoff there. So they're both weaker players. Cutoff is 100-0 so far, which also makes it very likely he's a fish. Button is 14-0, which makes it likely he's a tighter breed of passive fish. But anyway, so hero raises 225, which I think is a little bit small. I would normally go 30 here, just like 6 big blinds instead of 5. We're in the small blind here, so being out of position basically makes us want to add an extra big blind to our open size. The rule that I use in the Grinder's Manual in my book for this spot is called the ISO sizing rule, conveniently enough, and it states that hero should usually look to raise to 3 big blinds, plus 1 big blind per limper, plus another additional big blind if hero is out of position. So here you've got 2 limpers, which would be 3 plus 2 is 5, and then another one would be a 6th big blind for being out of position. Now this is really bad if you're in games where people are aggro and 3-betty, but luckily for us, the big blind is again a shorter stack player who's likely recreational and is 15-15. So we don't really have that consideration, so we're not worried about getting 3-bet light. So the size of 6 big blinds here would be slightly preferable to me over 5 big blinds. It kind of ensures that you go heads up more often, and when you have a hand like ace king of hearts, you really want to go heads up because it does 2 good things for you. One, it allows your c-bets to pick up more fold equity because you're c-betting into a smaller field, and part of the EV of isolating is always sort of hidden within the branches of the tree where we get called and miss the flop and take it down with a c-bet. And the second reason why we want to thin the field, especially with a hand like this, is that, well, I mean, this hand kind of thrives from flopping 1 pair, and 1 pair is good way more often heads up. Now, it's not a big deal. You're still going to have the best hand a lot here, 3-way, as you are heads up, but it still adds to the mix. But yeah, I guess the main reasons for wanting to thin the field here are obviously your added fold equity, your better hand strength when you flop a pair, and thirdly, and probably even more importantly than the second one I gave there, ace king can have showdown value when it misses, but that showdown value is very difficult to take the showdown heads up. 3-way, but heads up you can win with ace high a lot more often. So when both parties miss the flop and you don't want to c-bet because it's sufficiently dry or whatever, you can actually induce bluffs and check call and do things heads up that you wouldn't really have the option to do in a 3-way pot. So definitely bigger is better here. It's a very detailed hand review, you can tell, because I'm still only at the first decision point and I've been ranting for a while, so that's going to be the nature of this series. I like to talk about my hands in a lot of depth. So the big blind, the 15-15 aforementioned player, raises to 96 cents from 25, so he makes it just under 4x. Cutoff calls and hero calls. So the poster adds here, so cutoff calls, so he says, 2 limpers and I raise it to pot size from small blind and get 3-bet quite large by big blind. Cutoff calls and we get a pretty good price to call, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of situation where I don't really love having a 4-bet range, honestly, because part of your value comes from having fish in the pot, and I don't really like the idea of at 5NL, like 4-bet bluffing a guy who's 15-15 in the big blind, who's not done that much so far, and could easily just have like a value-orientated 3-bet range. He has 3-bet like once out of a few opportunities so far, I think. Maybe once or twice. He's got a 40% 3-bet over this tiny sample, which is not irrelevant. It does say he might be a bit more active, but just in general as a population read, I don't think having a 4-bet bluff range here is going to be super profitable because people are quite nitty at 3-betting ISOs, just based on me and my students' experience of the 5 no limit population. And yeah, I mean, like I said, the other thing is that you want to play pots with fish, so like when you flop top pair, you actually would rather that there's a fish in the pot than not a fish in the pot here. I said you want to thin the field when you're raising, that's true, but when you've lost that ability and you're going to be calling anyway, you'd kind of rather there were fish in there now that you don't have the initiative and you're against a stronger range. So you want the fish in there to dilute that kind of negative of the situation of being against a stronger range without the initiative and give you more implied odds for when you flop 1 pair plus, which will be very strong with Ace King of Hearts. Okay, so we do decide to call, which I like. I think this is good. The original poster then says we flop the nut flush draw, because we do. The flop is Queen Jack 3 with 2 hearts. The Queen and the 3 are hearts. The Jack is the Jack of Spades. And he says, well, what happens is that hero's first to act, obviously, and he says, my brain was kind of tilting here. What should I do? They both had less than pot behind. Well, this situation is very easy to play. The question becomes, like, would you rather check call all the money off, or would you rather bet all the money off? Well, I'd rather bet it off. And that's because we have a bit more fold equity that way. If we check call, like, someone else bets, the other player's still faced with 1 bet, so it's not like we can induce, like, wider calls and get better odds that way by checking. So when we bet here, it's very unlikely we'll take the pot down. We'll usually always end up in some kind of flip situation, but that's fine. And there's no reason not to seize any fold equity that there is here. You know, if someone does have, like, ace-king, if they both have the other ace-king combos and are going to fold to the shove, like, more power to us, because those combos could end up getting to showdown and chopping with us when we don't make our hand. So we need to bet at some point, and I'd rather just stick the money in now. First to act, well, we've got the 2 streets to come, rather than, you know, flop checking through and then the turn bricks, and it's just a worse situation for us. Not a big deal when you put the money in here, honestly, it doesn't really matter too much, but I think it's higher EV to just shove the flop. Note that if villains were to shove the flop, you would have to call, you'd be completely priced in, as this is an end of action spot, and you're going to meet your required equity target to call really easily in that end of action spot. So the effective stack behind here is like 170, into a pot of 290 on the flop, which is kind of important. So if we bet that ourselves, if someone bet that at us, it's like easily under pot, so we're going to need something like 28% equity in order to make a call here, maybe a bit less, and we're easily going to have that much here. We've got like 50% equity against a hand like ace-queen, and against a hand like aces or a set or something, we're not in bad shape at all. We've got like 40%, so we definitely need to be just getting this in on the flop and just shoving it. There's no reason to do anything else. It's a no-brainer now, not a big deal. You could check fold if you don't obviously make the heart draw there on that board. So yep, so he says, should I just check and call when someone else shoves, or if I shove myself, do I have any fold equity? Probably not much at all, and only against worse hands, although you may make a hand like 9s fold, which is a result, because you're not going to get there much more than half the time. So just making 9s surrender all its equity when it's going to win against you fairly often is really good. So, you know, if you check, you're not going to do that unless you shove turn and do it that way, but that's probably harder to make them fold in that situation. So I think this is a really clear shove, for sure. And yeah, so I agree with the way Heroes played this hand. I think it's a really good call to make before the flop. I think it's better than 4-betting, and now I agree with the shove, so I think the hand's played perfectly. Someone else has chimed in here and said, very clear shove pre for me. You know, given the stacks are shorter, yes, okay, yeah, I kind of didn't really think about that point. The stacks are so so short pre-flop that shoving there is a lot better than I first thought, because I didn't realise at the time when I was saying that we're actually not 100 deep with the 3-better there, or the fish. So there may be an argument there for shoving pre-flop. I think with 100 BB stacks you do just want to call, but given that we're only sort of like 25 to 30 BBs deep, pre-flop shoving it's probably higher EV actually, yeah. But 100 BB deep, so that's kind of my bad for just admitting that fact. So 100 BBs deep, I would call, but like shorter stacks like this, having like sort of 55, 60 BBs, I think, yeah, shoving pre-flop is absolutely fine. It's hard to go too wrong when you play this hand on both streets here. I think the EVs are still close, because you're not going to have much fold equity, so those spots where you do completely whiff the flop are quite minus EV for you, so calling and then getting it in when you hit the flop, like stop and go kind of strategy, is probably really close in EV, actually, even with these stack sizes here. I mean, it's dead money in the pot, but the advantage of shoving is obviously you get big blind to fold, which is great if he is squeezing a hand that has any equity against you. But the good thing for you, I guess, is that you're unlikely to fold the best hand to big blind after the flop, because if he is squeezing ace queens and ace jacks and stuff like that, then you're dominating those hands anyway. They've got very little equity, and there's often no harm in actually letting them see the flop if that's the case. So this hand is definitely a close one pre-flop. It's an interesting situation with these stack sizes, and I think a clear call with deeper stacks, and flop is a shove. Okay, let's move on to another hand now. So let's take a live tournament hand from a member who frequents like the casino to play live tournaments and plays tournaments online as well. It's like a tournament player that I coach. I do coach tournament guys as well, although they're fewer and further between than my cash grinders. So he says, slightly broader topic, so obviously there's going to be inferences to be drawn about this hand, you know, about more than just what to do in this one situation, which is nice. It's nice to generalize your hand history discussion and learn general things from it as well. So the Carrot Corner member says, this is from a live 30-man tourney last night with a pool of £1,200. 6 players remaining with 3 paid. Most of the money is in the top 2 slots. So he says, I am one of 2 small stacks with 18 big blinds. So we're 4-handed here. I'm under the gun, or 6 remaining, sorry, 6-handed. I'm under the gun with the 2 largest stacks in the blinds, and the 2 large stacks are about 40 BBs each. So just over double Hero's 18 big blind stack. Both blinds are very aggressive, so the big stacks are very aggressive players. The last few rounds have seen quite a lot of action, and the table is generally active, so I'm not expecting much fold equity at this table. I have Queen-Queen under the gun. My thoughts are that if I want to induce action, and I'm happy to get it in, ordinarily a min raise could look super strong. But there hasn't been a lot of action, and I do feel on this table the blinds will come after me. So I make it 2 big blinds, 4 folds to the big blind, 2 flats, so the pot's now 5 BBs. So min raising pre, I totally agree with you. Like, your hand is way too good to not want to induce action. In a tournament, you should always like separate your ranges up into things like min raise to induce, min raise to steal, and then shoving hands here. Like with 18 bigs, I'd be very tempted to shove stuff like ace jack and 8s and hands that don't flop as well, certainly like the pocket pair part, because picking up those blinds and picking up that fuel to stay alive is so invaluable. So I'd definitely be looking to have a shoving range here, but I'd also have min raising ranges. I'd have one that I wanted to see flops with lower equity hands if my shove gets called, like 10-9 suited, queen jack suited, stuff like that I can kind of play in a kind of, not a fit or fold manner, but I can selectively decide when I want to put money into the pot after the flop with those hands. And then I would have a range that shoves and a range that min raises to induce action as well, like queens and big hands like that. Jacks, ace king, ace queen suited maybe. So he reasons that, well, on the flop, first of all, is 2-4-6 rainbow, and big blind leads for pot, leads for 5 big blind. So we know this guy's aggressive. He's just led out in 6-4-2 rainbow. So there's a couple of things that can happen here. Like, he can be the kind of player who's leading out to like find out where he's at and just betting pot and then folding to a raise, or he can be the kind of aggro player who's kind of insane and just won't give up to a raise. Now the question here is like, how vulnerable is your hand versus how stable it is, and how likely are we to induce action by calling that we wouldn't get by raising the flop. So we'll get action by, obviously we're never folding here, we want to just maximize our value, right? So when we call, we get action from a select group of hands that we don't get that action from by raising the flop, and those hands are essentially bluffs and weak hands that are kind of putting out feeler bets that might spew on later streets, given that villain is aggressive and a big stack. In live tournaments, fields are soft. I've seen on many occasions players lead 6-4-2 rainbow with like ace-6 and then just shove the turn because they only got called on the flop, but also flip the hand face up and fold it when hero actually raises here. What's the downside to calling the flop? Well, our hand's not completely stable, is a little bit vulnerable to ace and king turns. It can make villain the best hand, or 5 outers with like 1 pair combos that he has here. But that's not a big consideration. That is honestly a risk you have to take at this point to induce more action. So I think the flop is a very clear call to shut out an aggressive villain's air range on this board that he misses all the time. It's just overwhelmingly likely as well that he's like, I'm the big stack bully, I will try and take the pot away, this flop misses your range, blah blah blah. Just like nonsense live player kind of logic, semi-logic if you want to call it that. So Hero should look to defend here very, very wide. I don't mind shoving as a bluff for the hand like ace-3 with like a gut shot and an overcard to some hand he could bet call off, but I wouldn't shove with queens, it's just way too good. I definitely want to protect my equity here. There aren't that many overcards to me. Likely 1 at best. It's very unlikely he has 2 overcards to us here, because ace-king would have 3-bet pre-flop. So there's 1 overcard at most here, maybe not even that much. Or 5 outs with a pair if he has connected with that board, which is again not super likely. Around 2, 4, 6 rainbow. So your hand's actually more stable than it looks. You need to induce action. If he does have a hand like pocket 7s, you're still going to get paid off on lots of runouts anyway, just by him checking and you betting, or him spewing, or whatever. So certainly, you should be calling that flop and not shoving that flop. It'd be pretty terrible, I think, to shove that flop. So the student says, obviously the result of the hand is fairly irrelevant, but I have 2 questions. Shows he's thinking about the result as he's writing that, but it's good that he didn't include it. But it does show that he's probably results orientated in some way. So he says 2 questions. 1, is a better sizing pre 3x or even 4x? No, because you want to induce, and blinds are already so big that people aren't just going to like mine you en masse to try and like flop stuff at this kind of stack depth. They just can't get away with it. It's too significant a chunk of their stack. So you're at the part of the tournament where even more aggressive players will tighten up here to a min raise. So no, you don't need that. You can thin the field sufficiently with a min raise and get action, which is the 2 things you want to do. And should I call or push this flop? You should certainly call this flop. Pushing this flop is pretty damn terrible in my opinion. So he says, these situations are critical to cashing late in tourneys, and I'd be interested in your views. Absolutely. Very common spot, and one that's well worth clarifying how to play. So we get a bit of responses. I won't go into them. They're just kind of like long and discussing the structure of tournaments and stuff like that, as well as giving strategy advice. But I think the general consensus here should be that we are looking to flat the flop. Okay, let's move on to another spot here. Let's pick one last hand. Let's deal with this one. So, original poster says, villain is an unknown. They've been at the table for 5 hands and not played one yet, so probably not a fish, but that's all I've got. That's true. A fish usually does play a hand in 5, but it could be a tighter fish, like a 25 for a tight passive player, one of the rarer types of player. But yeah, on average, this will just be a reg or like a nitty player, most often just a tightest reg, or just a normal reg, for that matter. So, Hero's dealt 6-6, and Hero is button. 2 folds to Hero in a 5-handed game, and Hero min opens to 20 cents at a 10 NL table, 6 max online. Big blind calls. Who is the player we only have 5 hands on, and we go heads up to a flop of ace, ace, 8, rainbow. So, original poster says, standard min raise on the button, pre, and a dry flop that villain's wide range has difficulty connecting with, so I bet to protect my pair and get called. That's fine, in a vacuum that makes a lot of sense. I would maybe like to see my student thinking a bit more about long-term EV and how to strategize this flop a little bit, range versus range. Like, you don't really have any hands here that want to check. Even hands like queens and kings that are like showdown value, you can still get a lot of value here. Weaker pairs like 8s definitely need some protection, and 6s need protection. Ace-X wants to bet to set up 3 streets. Everything wants to bet here. Air wants to bet to pick up the pot. There's no reason that you can get exploited here for betting your whole range, because your range is just head and shoulders above a villain's. So you should definitely just range bet small with the entirety of your range on this flop and expect that to be the most optimal strategy in position. Dry board, huge range advantage. All the boxes are ticked for betting your whole range small. So Hero bets just under half pot, which I think is absolutely perfect, and big blind calls. So the student says 6 falls on the turn, which gives us a full house. So it's now ace, ace, 8, 6 with 2 diamonds. The backdoor flush draw appears with the 6 of diamonds falling on the turn. So he says, I turn the house and check back, as I think his range is still fairly wide and I wanted to give him the chance to make a pair or bluff the river. He then asks, can we bet the turn against villain's range and expect to get called much, or did I flush a bunch of EV down the toilet by checking back? Yeah, you definitely flushed a bunch of EV down the toilet by checking back, because you're committing something that I call the exponential mistake. Like, sure, you want to induce action from weaker hands as well, but there's no way like an 8 folds this turn. An 8 could call 3 times here, or at least call the turn before an overcard comes, but may not spew anymore if you check back. May just check call a river and you lose a street. And when you lose a street of value from a hand like pocket 9s or an 8 or something that doesn't call 3 times here, it's really bad, because you don't just lose the bet that you would have made on the turn, but you lose the bigger bet that never got to occur on the river due to the pot not being built. So you make that turn bet again on the river and you recoup that, but you fail to get your big river bet that you would have got had you built the pot on the turn. And this is the exponential mistake here. If you're out of position and you need to check a lot of your range because your c-bet range is now like missed that turn all day and you've got lots of error, fine, you can check there. But when you're in position, you absolutely must barrel this part of your range, unless you're like intent on balancing stuff. But if you want to balance stuff and check back against a competent reg and have a stronger check back range, or even an uncapped one, you want to use ace-x, because that blocks villain from having ace-x. When you have 6s and you don't have an 8 in your, or check back with an 8 even, when you have 6s and you have the boat and you don't have an ace in your range, like villain has an ace very often and you want to just like get that value now. Sure, you may get the same value against ace-x when he leads river by raising, but that's kind of murky waters there. Like, he's not always, he will usually lead river, but it's not unheard of for him to fold a weak ace to that line, but he's never going to fold a weak ace if you just bet 3 times. So I just would keep this simple and just bet this turn. I don't see there being a better option. You need to just build this pot in position. It's not an appropriate part of your range to check back to balance with. So yeah, just go bet, that's fine. So I don't really love the turn check, but I can see some stronger hands being checks there for balance purposes, but not this one. On the river is the 10 of clubs, and big blind leads for half pot, 41 cents, and hero raises to 150, which is a good raise size. It's weird, like what does your hand look like now? I don't know. I mean, it looks kind of bizarre. So you may get action here, you may get called, but you're not making any more than you would have made anyway, but it's just betting turn, betting river, and a simple line. So yeah, again, just bet turn, can't stress that enough. So the original poster now reasons he leads river, I raise, and he 3-bets. This is rarely a bluff, so I put him on at least an ace now. Question is, do you 4-bet for value? Yeah, so do you want to shove here, or are you content just calling off? Now, this is bottom set on this board, or bottom full house. Like, pocket 8s beats you, ace 10 beats you, ace 8 beats you, pocket 10s beat you. So to raise here, you need villain to be really bad. Like, you need him to be, like, for one, 3-betting the river with just, like, ace jack or something. Like, he shouldn't even have ace queen, because he just flatted pre. So what's the best ace he can really have here? Like, exactly ace jack, trips, and is he going to 3-bet that on the river? And if he does 3-bet on that river, is he going to call a 4-bet? Way too optimistic. So your hand is good here. You obviously call the flop, the river 3-bet by villain. He could have a worse value hand, but he's not always stacking off with it, and I certainly don't think that you're deep here well, you're not deep, you're 100 BBs deep. So basically the sizing on the river is big blind leads for 41 cents, hero raises to $1.50, and big blind raises to $3.41. So it's small. I would just call. Like, you're going to lose here a fair amount, like close to 50% probably when you get raised here, honestly. But it's a very clear call for pot odds, and the fact that you can have worse for value, and it's in no way in hell is that a 4-bet. Definitely not. So just call that river. Your hand is relative to your opponent's line. So your opponent's line is extremely polarized to better hands and air, with maybe a couple of worse hands that may not call off the rest. So certainly you don't want to go ahead and shove that river or anything like that. Consensus on the thread. Yeah, so one person responds, as played, I'm getting this in. If they have a better hand and it's a cooler. That's just a terrible bit of reasoning as far as I'm concerned. I mean, like, you can't just call things coolers because you have the absolute hand strength of a full house. Because people need to be really bad to just raise a random ace on the river. To 3-bet a random ace. Not raise a random ace, but 3-bet it. They need to be even worse to call off a 4-bet shove with that hand. So you can't just say, well, I've got a full house, so therefore, you know, it's a cooler if I get called. So I need to get on these threads and advise people that they should not actually be shoving this river, because I think it's actually pretty bad. So yeah, I would just call river, certainly, in this situation. With bottom full house, with a better full house like ace 6 or pocket 10s, I'd be very inclined to shove there. But there's no reason that villain's range is capped. He can have all the nuts in his range for sure. So totally disagree with that. Definitely think we need to be just calling that river after we get 3-bet after we raise and get 3-bet. Just no way can we shove, like no way in hell. Anyway, that has been Hands from the Corner. Hope you found those 3 spots today interesting. I think they were pretty unique and cool hands, and there'll be more Hands from the Corner coming your way shortly, as well as other content in the Carrot Poker podcast. The update on the Grounders Manual Kindle version is that we're about a week away now. We've got the thing to look really good. We just need to iron out a few final bugs, and then we are publishing. So I will be letting you guys know as soon as that's available on the Amazon Kindle store. I'll be announcing it on the podcast and the website everywhere I can, and the group. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, thanks again for listening. Appreciating all your feedback. So just get hold of me if you're interested in coaching, the book, feedback for the podcast, want to appear in the podcast, anything you like. admin@carrotcorner.com is the place to get hold of me. Until then, run good. Good luck at the tables. See you next time.